Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be looking at the spectral filtering capabilities of Iris 2. This is a very, very, very powerful thing because I've never seen filters this intuitive and useful before. Maybe there exist in other synths and I just don't know about them, but this is pretty cool just the way they've implemented this. So let me really quick show you it in action. So I have this bass sound. It sounds like this. And if I were to put it, by the way, all these sounds are Iris 2 except this drum loop. If I were to put it in a loop, it would sound like this. And what I've done is I treat this as a starting point. So I take whatever my sound source is and then filter it super specifically to get a really cool starting point. And then I run it through the effects as I see fit. So we're not going to be talking about this effect stack here. But if I were to just change what the beginning source sound by just putting a little cut right here, check it out. And you got to think really critically about this, right? So you could theoretically make a little bandpass filter, or in this case, a notch filter would be more appropriate, and automate it according to its cue and stuff. But it would just be so ridiculous to make a path like this. Like, this is so much more intuitive, like super duper intuitive. And so these sorts of little cuts can really affect the beginning of the sound. You can get at things in ways you could not get at before, where envelope is concerned. It's just very intuitive method of doing things. Now we can also do moves. Speaking of envelope, where we add a little bit here and maybe a little bit here, and this will dramatically change the attack sound of our bass. I'm not saying that you'd want that sound, but there are other ways if you added it in a little more low end. So you can get some that you want. You probably don't want to sound like that, but if you get just the right combo, it can sound super duper cool. So let's go ahead and dive into what this is here. So that's sort of my philosophy. I actually have a couple different ones when I'm working. Like if I'm working with a drum loop, I'll treat it differently than I will if I'm working with a one-shot bass sound, because I'm gonna have it interact differently with my track and the effects I can get. Now, if I want to record what I'm doing, because there's no way to really automate things, I wish there were, you can go ahead and just hit record and then make various changes while it's playing to get some cool movement and then draw from that sample bed that you created. So let's go ahead and hop into this. So here I have an empty Iris 2, and it is right here. And what we're going to do, actually, I want to show you this sound without any of the processing too. So here's the sound. Let me turn this off. And this is it without processing. It's not that exciting. So this is one of those things where I make a big chain and then I do sort of a feedback loop with myself. I say, oh, this is what it sounds like. It comes into my brain. I make a decision and I'll go back and I'll change the source, move things around. Like I was showing you before, those moves become really, really, really valuable. These first moves with such a specific filter after such a big effect chain, because it's going to get compounded as it goes through things. So I just wanted to show you that this isn't like some incredibly genius patch coming out of Iris 2. The power is in how specific you can be with the filter. So very kind of cool. So let's pull open our blank instance of Iris 2 and let's just load up a sound from instruments. Let's go to synthesizers. Odyssey. Let's go to the Odyssey and we'll just load up. I loaded up C3 or whatever it was in the first sample slot. And so we're familiar with loading samples, so no big shock there. I've minimized everything because I want to focus on the spectral filtering aspect of what we're going to be doing. And you'll notice that right off the bat, we're given a couple things. So we're given the waveform view up here. This is the waveform. This waveform is just a big tone, so it's not that interesting, but it's very valuable in longer samples for navigation. So if I wanted to, I can zoom in like so. I could just grab the end and zoom in. I'm able to drag this selection around and even click to the position I desire to be at. So very intuitive that way. I can alternatively, if I were to have a selection here, so let's say I've got some sort of a selection, I'm able to zoom in to whatever I have selected, right? So I zoom in, it will always zoom in to whatever is selected. So I can get rid of a zoom selection by, or not get rid of this gets rid of a selection. This gets rid of my zoom. So to get rid of my zoom, or zoom out full as the tooltip says, you just click it and it brings you back here. If I were to make another selection and zoom into selection, would now take this into consideration. And now I've got only my selected area in here. This gray area is included because you can't zoom. Like, that's weird. You can't do that. So I'm going to get rid of that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm able to zoom in conventionally. So here I have a magnifying glass and I can zoom in where I click. And this is cool. If I want to undo my zoom selection, you hold down Alt. It becomes a minus sign. And it could take a while to do this because the processing is pretty crazy. So, okay, you can zoom in and out that way. And you can also do panning zooming. So this is great. This top guy up here is really great for zooming horizontally, but you can't go up and down. So what you can do to fix that, actually, something I haven't tried is, can you go up and down? I haven't tried this, so I should probably try it first. So let's zoom in a ways. Yeah, you can't go up and down like I thought. But if you select your panning tool, you can go up and down. How cool is that? And you can go left and right. So this may be a superior tool for what you want if you need to go up or down if you've zoomed in too far. So I'm going to remove that selection. Those are the zoom tools here. Over here, you have your selection tools. Now, this is a spectral filter, meaning it can look at your spectrum. This is a spectrograph, and you're capable of selecting very specific parts of your spectrograph to play at particular times. Before we dive into this, let's talk about what we're looking at here. So this is a spectrogram. I expect you to know what that is. So we have our frequencies over here, and we have time represented on the x-axis. So on the x-axis, I have mine represented in seconds. If you go into settings, which is up here, you can go into show time ruler, and then you can change the unit that that's shown to you in. So you can choose samples or seconds. So I chose, whoops, I didn't mean to click that. I'm not even sure if I did click it. I think I did. But anyways, I chose seconds. And as you can see here it is in seconds. So we also have down here the ability to change our view between the waveform view, which is very handy for drum loops because you're able to make decisions based on the waveform, which will be associated with time. So you can make time dependent changes that way. Or you can choose a mix or go to the spectrogram. So super handy. I tend to hang out in one or the other. So, okay, cool. Let's talk about making selections. So here we've got our spectrogram, and we can select parts of it for playback. And we're able to do this by using our various selection tools here. We can cancel selection by hitting this X, meaning clear selection. And we're able to select in different domains. So here we've got our time domain selector. So naturally, this is up and down because, not up and down. This is left and right. So this will select horizontally. And we're able to select horizontally. You're able to remove part of your selection by holding down Alt over selection and just getting rid of it. So it's very similar to Pro Tools in this way. So you can remove selections or you can just drag over them. You're able to, as soon as your hand falls over a selection, you can click and drag that selection to move it to an appropriate location if you don't like where it's at. If you ever stop over another selection and let go, it's going to include that as part of your new selection. I wish there was a way to say like merge regions or something and have a way to keep regions separate from each other, but there's not a way to do that currently. So just letting you know. Now let's say that you have your hand tool, but let's say you've got a hole. We'll talk about making these holes in a second. Let's say you've got a hole, but you want to, instead of grabbing it, you want to use your draw tool instead, right? You want to start drawing. And there's various reasons why you'd want to do this. So we've got our time domain selected. If you hold down Shift, it will switch you to drawing again. So you can choose to get rid of the grabber tool, but by default, when you hover over it, it will be a grabber tool. So that's pretty cool. Something that you sort of just need to know. And again, Alt will allow you to switch immediately to the eraser tool, but in that domain. So that's powerful. Okay, that's an important note when you're working here. This is domain specific. So this will erase in the time domain, meaning horizontally. So all frequencies over a period of time or draw over a period of time. Cool. We're going to skip this one, go down to the next one. This one is our frequency selection tool. I'm going to clear my selection and I'm going to select my frequency selection tool. All the same hotkeys apply, and I'm able to click and drag and select frequencies. And pretty cool. I didn't play an example from that last one, but it would have played through, and if there was a gap, it would basically just be a super mega fancy gate. It would just stop. So that's how that would work. But I guess it's not super mega fancy because it wouldn't act on incoming audio. It'd be like pre-programmed in. So it's like some sort of ridiculous version of a gate. But anyways, we're able to select the frequency domain and we can do this, click, drag, exit things. And then also we can switch. If let's say we don't want to grab and move around, we can switch in. Now, this may be a question you have, and I don't know currently how to do this, but let's say that I want to grab this region, and this region, and only move those up and down. How do you do that? I have no idea. Now, if you hold down Control, you're able to move everything, but you can't like select specific regions and move them around. That's something that I have yet to do. If someone figures it out, let me know. I'd be very interested in learning that tooltip. So cool. Now that's our frequency domain. So that's vertically, the other one's horizontally. But there is another option we have here. We have the option of combining them into frequency in time. Naturally, that's going to be a box because here we've got time and frequency on the two axes, and we're able to do selections like this. And we can click and drag this around. Now you notice when I drag it, it goes in both axes. Let's say that I have made a selection like this, but I want it to stay in one time domain. Or in the time domain. So I want to select the time domain. Then I can drag it specifically horizontally. And let's say that I've got that sorted, but I want to change my frequency selection only. Well, I can move it up or down, but not left or right. So that's something to note is the tool that you have selected will also change the dimensions you can drag it in. And that can be super useful if you want your selection to sit still. So, okay, we're able to also, if we hold down Alt again, we can cut things instead. And alternatively, we can grab it, move it around. And if we hold down Shift while we have a grabber tool on, let's say we would instead draw, it will give us the draw tool back. So we can begin to make more complicated shapes that wouldn't really be possible otherwise without clicking and dragging outside, which is not always very desirable. So, okay, cool. So that's really nifty. We're able to be very specific with our sounds. Okay, we also have our lasso tool, so we're able to just draw freehand, do something like that, if that's something you're into. And we also have the capability of a paint tool. So we're able to paint on, which can be very handy dandy. And we're also able to change the brush size. I guess that's the fanciest way I know how to say it. And you see we have a very small brush or a very large brush. If you hold down Alt, it will erase. If you hold down Shift while your grabber tool's on, it'll give you that tool back. So you're able to do things like that, which are super handy. Now, let's say that you have, now, of course, we're going to get to the magic eraser tool. The magic wand tool in just a sec. But here you have your eraser tool, and your eraser tool is just the inverse of your paint tool. So you're able to erase specific areas. And I'm not really aware of any special keys here. It's just your eraser, and you can also select the size here, and you're able to get rid of the selection that way. You have this magic wand selection tool. This thing does a number of cool things. Well, it does one thing really cool. So you can click on a specific area and it will actually select what it deems as a frequency. If you click again, it will analyze and look for a harmonic spectrum by that series. So let's really quick erase this. So let's say, let's look at that. And it's pretty much just a sine wave, very accurate. And if I click it again, it will look for that spectrum. And wow, that's like really cool. And this is like a series of bandpass filters that would be ridiculous to try and make on your own. Now, if you do this, there are some interesting things. So if you want to go to your grabber tool at this point, you can. And again, you're going to be moving single things, so you may not want to do that. So if I wanted to move this selection as a whole, I'd have to go to another domain, hold Control and move it, but it kind of freezes up. So maybe on your computer it'll work great, but on mine, it's not really an option. I just kind of live with it. You can also augment what this thing selects, not only just by clicking in different places, but also, let me undo a couple steps here, or just clear the selection. Also, by making a selection and then clicking with the magic wand tool, it will look at it very differently. And so, in this case, it doesn't play too much of a role, but in a sound that's a lot more atonal, maybe it's machinery or something, that could be a really important thing. It can really change your selection process. Cool. So besides all these nifty things, you also have the ability to flip domains. So you can flip time, you can flip frequency, and you can also invert just your selection. So if we flip in the time domain, as you can see horizontally, it did that. So that's all the noise. It's everything that's not a tone, because this thing is a tone. It's supposed to be a saw wave. We can flip back in the time domain. We can flip the frequency selection. Or this is the frequency, because it selected everything else. So this is just, it flips the entire selection. And then this is the time, the frequency domain selection. So pretty cool. Let's go ahead and get back to where we were. Whoops. Okay. Cool. So that is what that is. Now you can click this play button and it will actually play for you the changes you've done. If you don't want to hit a note, you're able to do so. And you're able to hear like, oh, okay, now let's see if I make a change here, like so. You can see that it is now reflecting that change here. That's what the preview button down there does. I don't use it that often, as you see. I prefer to just hit notes. So that's some of the spectrograph filtering powers you have here. Let's really quick grab a drum loop and drop it in. And let's see. Okay, cool. So that's the spectrograph of the drum loop. And you can see here's our waveform. We're able to move it around up here. But let's go to our waveform view, because it's more useful to see this in time. And so right now, let's go ahead and do some filtering with this thing. So if I were to hit the root note, which it has deemed as A3, I can change this if I want. But let's just say, hey, I want this thing to be I want it to be a lot louder. I want this one to start out filtered, right? So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to say, I want the filtering to go on like so. And you see also, this is so cool. It reflects the change of what the waveform would look like if you had it filtered. So I think there's massive learning capabilities here as well. So let's just say we want that. And then we can make changes. You see how intuitive this is as far as forming a cool filtered rhythm perspective. And then let's go to our time domain and let's hold down shift, get something that I want, and then get rid of that front part. And you know, as you can see, this is just so cool. We can like deliberately take out like holes, like do phaser reaction that's just really weird. So you'd have to go through here. Something is you'd want your drum loop to be at the correct tempo so that when you do playback, it'll play back at the correct speed. Given you're hitting the root note, that's where things like fixed and other sample behaviors will become more important. But I just wanted to give you an example of it with a drum loop. Let's go back and look at my other example in a little more detail now. So you can see here that this bass, the way I'm looking at this bass sound right here is specifically, if it'll open, there we go. You don't generally want two of these things open at a time too. So it just kills your CPU. But if you have them closed, you'd be surprised. You can have a number of them going at the same time. But this bass sound right here, if I were to zoom back to our spectrogram view or switch our view back, is if I remove these are going to be the louder harmonics. So it makes sense. But I can also make filter changes as it goes through. I can adjust the speed according to the note I play. So if I play an upper note, it'll play a lot faster. But if I hit a low note, it'll actually go through my filter movements slower. And that means that even small changes here will be very important. You can see here, I clearly used the magic wand tool to find a spectrum and then augmented it with the paint tool. And as a result, I got something really cool. Now, what I was talking about earlier is that if I want to, let's say that I want to record changes of maybe this thing getting drawn in as the thing plays. Well, there's not really a way to do this. So what I can do is I can just say, hey, record the output of this bus as I'm playing. And then I can create a whole bunch of cool samples as I go. And right now it's in one shot record. And we're going to do loop recording. So now it'll do loop record. And I can create a whole bed of things that's going on. So if I were to play it back. So cool. And as you can see here, it's generated a bunch. I'd probably do a longer loop here. But as you can see, I could do this, and now I have a whole bunch of stuff I can do over time. So that's how I would go about trying to overcome the automation gap that I have going on here. So I turn off the recording here, and I don't want that on here. And that's recording the output here. Let's say I could record a dry output, get a really interesting thing that has flux, which I cover in the Mixing from the Ground Up if you're curious, or Principles of Mixing series if you're curious what flux is. I can introduce a very specific flux that I want musically in a way that just would be so much harder to do in other plugins. And that's why I think Iris 2, this is just so ridiculous. Having a filter of this level is just like blowing my mind. But yeah, I'm sure there's other plugs. There's got to be another plug somewhere out there that does something similar, because there always is. There's always some other one. But this is the first one I ran into that gives me the power like this. So I think this is a really cool weapon. If you have any questions, let me know. I know this is kind of a lot to take in, and it's a little long-winded, but I want to explain all the features and typical ways of using them that'd be musically useful to you. Because this is just a bass sound, but you can do the same thing with lead sounds, pad sounds. The world is your oyster. If you have any questions, again, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.